Hello and welcome to Lost Love Mystery, where we explore the twists and turns of love, the pain of betrayal, and the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart. The low rumble of the engine filled the silence as Alex steered his truck into the parking lot of the Rusty Nail, a dimly lit bar sitting on the outskirts of town. He had been here plenty of times before, sometimes for a quiet drink after a long day at the shop, other times just to catch a game on the old, flickering TV above the bar. But tonight was different. He wasn't here for a beer. As he stepped out, the gravel crunched beneath his boots. A warm breeze carried the sharp scent of asphalt and cigarette smoke, mingling with the distant twang of country music leaking from inside. Something gnawed at him, a slow-burning unease that had been there for weeks. Jack was like a brother, one of the few good men left in this world. He worked hard, kept his head down, and did right by his family. And family meant trust. But lately, that trust had been wearing thin. Jack had mentioned how Linda, his wife, had been acting strange. Late nights, extra shifts at the bar, always glued to her phone, her face unreadable. At first, Jack blamed himself, saying he was on the road too much. But Alex knew better. He had seen it before. The way people start to slip away, their excuses growing weaker, their lies stacking higher. Tonight, he needed the truth. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, a wave of sound hit him. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low murmur of conversations blending into the steady hum of a Johnny Cash tune playing from the jukebox. The bar was crowded. Regulars slumped over their drinks. Passing truckers nursed beers, and young couples whispered in dark corners. Then he saw her. Linda. She stood behind the bar, effortlessly charming as always. Her blonde hair was pulled back, a few loose strands framing her face, and she moved with the practiced ease of someone who knew how to command attention. She was smiling, laughing, but it wasn't the casual, polite laughter of a bartender entertaining customers. It was something else, something too familiar, too personal. Alex's gaze shifted to the man across from her. Tall, dark-haired, a confident smirk. He leaned in too close, whispering something that made Linda throw her head back in laughter. Her hand brushed his forearm, casual, fleeting. But Alex knew better. He had seen this game before. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled around the cold bottle of beer he hadn't even realized he was holding. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was innocent. But then it happened. The man reached across the bar, his fingers barely grazing the inside of Linda's wrist. And instead of pulling away, she smiled. Slow. Knowing. Alex exhaled sharply, a slow burn creeping up his spine. That wasn't the smile of a woman missing her husband. His beer suddenly tasted bitter. Setting the bottle down with more force than necessary, he drew a steady breath. He wasn't going to act now. Not yet. He needed to be sure. Outside, he sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Jack was his best friend. His family, in every way that mattered. If Linda was betraying him, Jack deserved to know. Then, the door swung open. Linda stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. She laughed, carefree, light, like nothing in the world was wrong. But she wasn't alone. The man followed. Alex watched as they walked together, their bodies too close, their movements too familiar. The man placed a hand on the small of Linda's back, guiding her toward the parking lot. Alex's gut twisted. It wasn't just innocent flirting. As they reached the man's car, Linda leaned in, whispering something against his ear. He chuckled, shaking his head before unlocking the door. She slid inside, her hand resting on his thigh for just a second too long. That was it. That was the moment when suspicion became certainty. Alex turned the key in the ignition and followed at a safe distance. The car ahead moved smoothly through the quiet town, past darkened storefronts and shuttered gas stations. Then, the neon sign flickered into view. Oakwood Inn, a roadside motel. The kind of place with peeling paint, vending machines that only took quarters, and rooms rented by the hour. Alex pulled over across the street, his truck hidden in the shadows. His phone felt heavy in his palm as he swiped to the camera. The car door opened. Linda stepped out first, brushing her hair back, her expression coy, teasing. The man followed, throwing a quick glance around before taking her hand. Together, they walked inside, their pace slow, unhurried, like they had done this before. Alex hit record. Through the camera lens, everything was clear, the dim glow of the motel sign casting long shadows, The way Linda rested her head against the man's shoulder, the ease with which he retrieved a room key from the front desk. Then, they disappeared inside. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A sickness spread through his chest, a mixture of anger and disgust. He wanted to storm in, drag her out, demand an explanation. But this wasn't his battle. This was Jack's. He stopped the recording, quickly reviewing the footage. The evidence was undeniable. His fingers hovered over his phone as he found Jack's name. He typed the only words that mattered. "You need to see this." And then, he hit send. Jack pulled into his driveway late that night, his truck's engine cutting through the silence. The house was dark, empty. He had spent years on the road, believing every mile he drove was for his wife, for their future. Now, every whispered, "I love you," over the phone felt like a cruel joke. His phone vibrated. A message from Alex. "You sure you want to go through with this?" Jack exhaled slowly. He didn't need to think. The betrayal had already carved itself into his mind, replaying over and over like a never-ending nightmare. His fingers moved across the screen. More than ever. The next morning, Jack met Alex at the garage. The sharp scent of oil and metal filled the air, familiar, grounding. Alex leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, watching him carefully. "You good?" Alex asked. Jack gave a dry chuckle. "I will be. Once this is done." Alex nodded, understanding there was no changing his mind. "All right," he said. It was time. Jack tightened his grip on the phone, his knuckles turning white. Linda thought she was clever, that she had covered her tracks well. She believed she had won, but she had no idea what was coming. Jack had already set the wheels in motion before he even returned to town. He had made a call to the owner of the Blue Lantern, the upscale restaurant where he and Linda had once celebrated anniversaries and milestones, back when those moments had meant something. The owner was an old friend, one who owed Jack a favor. The response had been immediate. "Say no more," the owner had said. "Just tell me when." Now, standing in the garage with Alex, Jack laid out his plan with cold precision. "I'm going to invite her to dinner," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'll tell her I want to fix things, that we should talk. She'll believe it because she wants to believe it. She'll get all dressed up, thinking she's won, thinking I'm the same fool I always was." His jaw clenched. "And then, when the time is right, she'll see exactly what she's done." Alex's expression darkened. "And the restaurant's on board?" Jack nodded. "They'll play the video. The entire thing. In front of everyone." A slow breath left Alex. He had seen the footage himself, the damning evidence of Linda's betrayal. Watching it had been enough to stir the same burning rage that now consumed Jack. "You sure she won't suspect anything?" Alex asked. Jack let out a humorless smirk. "She's always underestimated me. That's her biggest mistake." A heavy silence settled between them before Alex gave a single nod. "All right," he said. "Let's make sure she never forgets it." That evening, Jack made the call. Linda picked up on the second ring, her voice carrying a note of surprise. "Jack." He forced warmth into his tone, the same easy voice he had used countless times before. "Hey, sweetheart." A pause. Then, cautiously, she asked, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon." "I've been thinking," he said smoothly. "I don't want to throw everything away. Maybe we should talk. Face to face." Another pause. He could almost hear her heartbeat quicken on the other end. "You mean it?" "I do," he lied. "Let's have dinner. The Blue Lantern. Tomorrow night." She hesitated, but he already knew what was running through her mind. She was thinking she had won, that he was coming back, like he always did, the loyal husband willing to forgive. She had no idea. "Okay," she finally said, excitement creeping into her voice. "I'll be there." Jack allowed himself a small, empty smile. "Good," he said. "See you then." As he hung up, his expression hardened. Tomorrow, everything would change. The Blue Lantern buzzed with quiet conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off polished silverware. It was an elegant scene, a place of refinement, one that would soon bear witness to a reckoning. At a corner table, Jack sat across from Linda, his expression unreadable as he nursed a glass of whiskey. She, oblivious, twirled the stem of her wine glass between delicate fingers, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "This was a nice idea," she said sweetly. "We haven't done this in a while." Jack exhaled slowly, his gaze distant. "Yeah," he murmured. "Long overdue." Linda chuckled, mistaking his restraint for vulnerability. Maybe we should do this more often. She reached across the table, resting her hand over his. Jack did not flinch, but when he met her gaze, there was something in his eyes that made her pause, something cold and calculating. Absolutely, he said, setting down his glass. His voice was even, unnervingly steady. In fact, I wanted tonight to be special. Her smile widened. She had no idea. Before she could respond, the restaurant lights dimmed further. Conversations quieted. And then, the large projection screen on the far wall flickered to life. At first, guests assumed it was some kind of promotional video. Then the footage began. A hotel entrance. A familiar woman in a tight red dress, standing too close to a man who was not her husband. Linda. The restaurant fell silent. Linda's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. No, she whispered. The footage continued, mercilessly. The stranger's hand rested on the small of her back as they entered the lobby. Then another angle, a later shot, showing them stepping into the elevator together. The timestamp in the corner of the screen sealed it. The truth was undeniable. Gasps rippled through the room. A waiter, mid-step with a tray of cocktails, stopped dead. A woman covered her mouth in shock. Someone let out a low whistle. Jack didn't need to watch. He had already seen it. Instead, he watched Linda. Her pupils shrank. Her throat bobbed as she tried to swallow. Her head snapped toward Jack, her lips parting, searching for something to say. Jack, she rasped, reaching for him. He pulled away, not violently, not with anger. Just enough to make it clear her touch was no longer welcome. Please, she tried again, her voice breaking. But there was nothing left to say. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew. Jack stood slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt with quiet precision. And then, for the first time since the video started, he smiled. A cold, hollow smile. You were right, Linda, he said, his voice carrying through the hushed room. We really should do this more often. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Linda remained frozen in place, her world crumbling around her. The night air was sharp against Linda's burning cheeks as she stumbled out of the restaurant. The whispers and laughter still rang in her ears, slicing deeper than any blade. She needed to get away. Now, her heels clicked against the pavement as she hurried down the sidewalk, each step feeling heavier than the last. Then, her phone buzzed violently in her purse. She hesitated before looking. Unknown number. You should be ashamed of yourself. A second message followed. Ex-coworker, bar manager, don't bother coming in tomorrow. Or ever. Her breath hitched. The bar had been her escape, her domain, where she thrived on attention and admiration. Now, even that was gone. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, blinking rapidly. It wasn't just about Jack. It wasn't just about one night. Everything was unraveling. A group of women passed by, their whispers sharp, their glances cutting. Linda clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Desperation clawed at her. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. Who would help her? Who would even take her call? Jack was out of the question, and for the first time, the weight of her choices truly settled in. She had lost everything, and this was only the beginning. Linda's fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, her mind racing. She needed someone, anyone, to tell her this wasn't as bad as it seemed, that there was a way to fix this. Her parents. Yes, they had always stood by her, always told her she was special, that she deserved the best. If anyone would understand, it was them. With a shaking breath, she tapped her mother's name and pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, a third time. Finally, the familiar voice answered. But something was different. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and distant. Mom, it's me. Her mother cut her off. We saw the video. Linda felt the breath leave her lungs. We saw everything. Her mother continued, her tone sharp and unforgiving. Your father doesn't even want to speak to you right now. Linda's throat tightened. Mom, please let me explain. Explain, her mother snapped. Linda, you humiliated us. Our friends, our community, everyone we know. How could you do this? Tears blurred Linda's vision as she staggered against the wall of a closed storefront, gripping her phone as if it were a lifeline. I didn't mean. You made your choice, her mother interrupted, her voice like ice. And now you have to live with it. Don't call us again. Click. The line went dead. Linda stared at the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. The silence on the other end felt heavier than any words could. This couldn't be happening. She wanted to scream, to beg, to make it all go away. But deep down, she knew there was no going back. The town had already turned against her. Her job was gone. Her own parents had disowned her. And Jack had walked away without looking back. His final words echoed in her mind, slicing deeper than anything else. You chose this. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto a cold bench, her shoulders shaking as sobs racked her body. Her hands clutched her face, as if she could somehow hide from the shame suffocating her. For the first time in her life, Linda was truly, utterly alone.